creative living, utilizing today's technology with the best of the past to bring you innovative ideas and up-to-date information for creative lifestyles in today's active world. With your host, Sheryl Borden.
Welcome to Creative Living today. We're going to learn how to cook and eat gluten-free foods and demonstrate a technique for quilting called playing in the grid. One of my guests is Casey Pommering, and she's the founder of GlutenFree Food, which is an online resource for gluten-free cooking. Casey will discuss the benefits of a gluten-free diet and demonstrate how to prepare easy and delicious gluten-free meals. She even has a monthly foodie box club she'll talk about. She lives in Madera, California. We'll begin the show with Laura Murray, and she's a quilter and designer. Laura's going to demonstrate what she calls playing in the grid. She'll show how to use a paint stick primer on the background fabric and then use the grid as a guide for your quilted creation. This really makes beautiful fabric. Laura's business is Laura Murray Designs, and she's from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Laura, thank you so much for coming today, and you're going to show us some beautiful techniques, but I like the fact that you named this playing in the grid. It just sounds like a fun segment.
It is fun.
And how did you come up with this?
Well, I come from a background of quilting and piecing in the usual way, but the problem is that sometimes I'd make these blocks and not like them very much. Then I learned how to do rubbings with paint sticks and stamps and the wonders of fusible web. And I figured out how I could just play in the grid with little shapes and not have to piece them.
And I understand you like to think outside the box, so this just fits right in.
Well, I'm actually much more of a process person. I have no idea where these things are going to end up. It's just putting one thing down and putting something with it and seeing what happens.
Just making them.
That's right. That's why it's playing in the grid. I have no clue what they're going to be when they're done, and they are always different.
Well, and that's good. We thought we'd just show a couple before you start and maybe explain what this process is. Looks like a lot of triangles to me.
Well, that's all it is. It's squares and triangles, and they are layered one on top of another. And where you're seeing colors, the colors are coming from using paint sticks and doing the rubbings, which I'll show you how to do in a minute.
And there's no piecing, is there?
No piecing.
These are just butted up against each other.
They're butted up, and if you on here you see a very simple sample that starts with a grid.
And we'll show that.
So the grid is nothing more than, in this case, a 2.5-inch grid, 3 by 3. That's it.
And that's, I can see where this comes in.
And it's all done with little pieces like this, and there's no seam allowances, and you don't ever have to worry about, oh my, how will I ever piece this thing?
That's right. So if someone doesn't want to do the detailed piecing, this is the perfect project.
It is the perfect, it's got to have a sense of, it's about play, and it's about discovering what happens when you just move it in one direction versus another direction.
And some people have always told me when we've done quilting segments that it's so hard sometimes to find the right color fabric. You don't ever have to worry about that, do you?
No, I don't. I no longer make desperate runs to the fabric store trying to find just the perfect thing.
You just paint it, and these have all been painted, and we'll be showing that. But that is just exquisite. Beautiful. Okay. Well, now that we're all excited to learn how to do this and no piecing, I'm ready to learn to quilt.
Well, then I'm going to start out with showing you how to do the painting, because it doesn't make any sense unless you know how I got those patterns and colors on there.
Right.
And I am a stamp designer. This is one of my stamps called Spirals. I do have a variety of them. The first thing I do with stamps is I spray the top of them with a temporary spray adhesive.
Temporary's the key word.
Oh, it is definitely the key. You don't want to fire away with regular Elmer's glue. And
you don't cut these stamps apart, do you?
Nope, I do not cut them apart because it's a lot easier to do the rubbings when they're all hooked together. And what I'm really after is spare parts. It's like Legos.
Parts. Oh,
it's just like Legos. I want to have a lot of little spare parts that I can play with, because you can see from these pieces, I'm just going for lights and darks. That's all I care about. I want some squares, I want some triangles.
Okay. And this is just a cotton?
It's just a plain black cotton. I like lights, mediums, and darks. I like bright, strong colors. And when you begin to work with paint sticks, the first thing you're always going to do is, it's oil paint in stick form. It has a protective coating.
It's oil paint.
It has a protective coating. So what you do is you pinch. You just take this paper towel or napkin, pinch, and wipe.
So these are sturdy. They don't break off, do they?
No, they are quite sturdy. And better yet, this protective coating self-seals. So that means they never dry out, unlike every marker I've ever owned.
I know it.
Yes, it'd be nice to have that finer point, but this is always ready for you when you're ready. Now, the fabric goes on top and the purpose of that spray was to make it slightly tacky. And I still hold it. And what I'm going to do is I kind of feel where the edge is, and I start. See how I'm taking? It's like 1, 2, 3.
It's not like coloring.
No, you don't want to go back and forth because that moves the fabric. And you kind of have to, one of the things about using paint sticks for the first time is you have to undo your muscle memory from when you learned how to color.
Coloring books.
Now, I'm not, because I want mine to be kind of two-toned. I like multiple colors. I didn't color it. I haven't really finished it because what I want to do is go over it with green.
Oh, you can paint right on top of the other color.
Yeah, the cool thing about paint sticks is they do not blend in the same way that a liquid does. So,
and like oil paints, even though this is in a stick form, it's not going to smear.
No, I mean, if I were to really push my finger in it, it would do it when it's fresh. But by tomorrow, that wouldn't happen either. And my goal is to make sure I get all the way into the edges.
Okay.
All the way into the edges and the corners, and I want it to be fairly intense. I don't want to see black showing through.
Oh.
And it does have a tendency to absorb into it, which is another reason why you need to keep on hitting it again until you can see it come out looking something like this.
Now, what if you started this and then you got a phone call and walked away? Would it affect the...
it would be right there ready for me unless I had a spastic moment and moved the fabric.
Okay.
In which case I would start over.
Start over, I understand.
Yeah.
Now, would you go ahead and do this whole, all 8 of those?
I would do the whole thing.
Or,
I would, and then I would have 6 nice. I would have 6 nice squares to play with.
Gosh, you know, that doesn't even look like this. Isn't that amazing how different it looks when you colored it?
It is. That's one of the things about doing rubbings that I never tire of because they'll never be any two the same. And I have 21 colors to play with, so I could certainly create an amazing variety of.
Well, you sure could.
Of different appearing things, which is why you don't need to buy so much fabric anymore.
Now, do you need to let this set before you go and put it with
I
the
would,
adhesive?
if I were in a hurry, I'd do it right away, but hopefully
it wouldn't hurt the paint if you did.
You might lose a tiny bit, but not enough to worry about. I really just don't like working with it when it's coming off on my hands, so I'll wait till the next day. So I have a different version of the same stamp. That's ready to go. It's between 2 pieces of Steam 2 Light, which is this product. It's pressure sensitive, and it makes the process of layering ever so much easier because it has a temporary hold.
It holds it right in place for you.
And I like to fuse with a hot dry iron from the back side, so I flip it over.
To the back
and of course, I have put the back side of the fabric against the sticky side of the, and I'm just going to take it for a few minutes like this, and what will happen is that the
you can see where
it is melted. That tells me that it's melted.
I see.
And in that way, I don't have these little surprises down the road about, oh, drat, when I'm cutting it out.
Right.
Things haven't fused all the way.
Right.
Now, my next step here would be to cut these out. I cut my squares out. I would cut right on the line.
Oh,
I'm not leaving any kind of a border. I'm going to cut right on the line, like so. And I have a little pile of these over here so you can see the finished. I've done a variety of them. Some of my squares I have cut into, I've just cut on one diagonal, so I'll get one big triangle. Some of them I have cut on both diagonals, and I would get 4 small ones. Okay? These actually come from a different set of stamps. That's a 1 3/4, but you'll get that size triangle, so it all works out. So what I've got here is a little grouping of lights and darks. Some squares, some large triangles, some small triangles.
This is when the play part comes in, isn't it?
This is the play part. Now, a very simple thing that I started with is, well, what if I just used these shapes and did piecing without piecing? And this is an Ohio Star, a very familiar thing.
Oh,
and so I have, you can see where my middle.
That's the middle block.
Or I could say, you know, I like that middle a whole lot better anyway than what I've got on there, or I could do this. So I just play with these. And because I started with this, I always have these
And
grid
this
lines.
is that just the right size,
That's
isn't it?
right. So I can move them around.
Oh.
And I started this way, thinking, well, oh, that's kind of fun, because I can do the peel and stick thing. You know, I can just take this
That's
paper
why we
off the
made
back,
it adhesive.
and there it sits, like so. And it's not going to go anywhere.
And yet it's not permanent if you decided to angle it or something else.
Exactly. That
I
means
see.
I don't have to sew the whole thing together and
pin
then
it.
say, oh, drat. I really didn't like that very much. So that is why I'm quite enamored with the light steam and steam too, because of its
Right.
pressure-sensitive quality. I could continue on here and I could add more colors like we see here.
Now, could you go back and color after you pieced it?
Actually, I could say, I could just lay that right on top of. Well, this has been fused, but if I hadn't done the final fusing, I could have pulled it out. But even if I've done the final fusing on something like this, I could say, oh, hey, I could just
That looks
pop
better.
that right on top. That looks better. So in that manner, you can audition without making a commitment. You've never made a commitment right up until the time you do the final
That's
fusing.
right.
And that is why I don't have blocks I don't like anymore.
You like them all because you've played with them enough.
Well, I have. My personal rule is I have to be able to walk by it 3 times without wanting to move something, and then I know it's done.
Walk by it 3 times. That's a
Right.
good test.
So here's a finished one, but I could continue even now to play with this thing. If I wanted to change this out, I could just put something right on top of it. But then I went to something more complex because I do like complexity, and that is how we get to these. This one. This is actually a 2.5-inch square that I have here. And it's a 2.5-inch square because this is my basic building unit. It's a 2.5-inch square. And I've done a partial one so I can kind of walk you through how that works. I'm going to look at it this way. That way I can kind of see
It's
what
hard
I'm
to
doing.
tell once you get it all laid out. It's very different.
It is very different, and there never will be any two the same on this at all. You can see here, hopefully, these very faint lines. This is my grid. Now, I did, this is a larger version of the same thing where I left negative space. I can see that exposed.
Oh, this is
It's
the
a beautiful
negative. I
hand-dyed
see.
fabric. I left it exposed. I just had a bigger grid to play with. This is a smaller version, like you see here. And the way it starts is I just laid some squares down. I've got a combination of lights and darks. So then I start down in a corner, and I could say, oh,
Start in a
I
corner.
could start right here, and I can lay this on top of this.
Is there any rule for how many layers?
There are no rules whatsoever. It's
That's
just
right.
wonderful. I like that part. I do try to stay inside the grid with this, so everything lines up and doesn't go wandering off. I could decide to see this would if you were working one-dimensionally, which is what we are when we're piecing. I couldn't be. Well, I could, but I'd have to create some rather complicated piecing here. I can just put this little triangle right on top of that, what would have been a seam line.
Right.
And in that manner, I've created something like that. And there are no rules other than contrast. So playing in the grid is really just moving these parts around and seeing, oh, what would happen if I did this? What would happen?
And again, if you walk by it 3 times and it's okay, you know it's time to...
There is no rules other than a willingness to play and see what happens when you start rearranging these shapes. It's, for me, it's a very satisfying way of working because it's like working out a puzzle, but I never know where I'm going to end up.
Well, we'll go ahead and be watching how you finish this, and I just want to say thank you so much for showing us this technique. It looks like it'll be fun to play in the grid.
It is fun to play in the grid. Enjoy.
Casey, it's really nice to have you here, and I was so glad you were going to talk to us about baking for people or for a family who one or the other in the family may be gluten intolerant or have celiac disease. You found out that you had celiac disease from traveling and always coming back sick. How did you determine it, really?
You know, largely it was traveling because I was eating so many processed foods and on-the-go foods, or eating at restaurants when you end up eating bread, or I would eat pasta and that kind of stuff. But I was sick for a long period of time, and going to the doctor, diagnosed with IBS, diagnosed with colitis. I had too much stress. The fatigue was for, you know, any number of reasons. And I knew there was something else wrong, but
Convincing the doctors was
convincing
hard.
the doctor, and then, you know, listening to them tell me it was probably in my head was a challenge. So I read some information about celiac disease, and I said, this is me.
it.
That's what I have. So I made them test me, and sure enough, I found out that I had celiac.
So is it genetic? Is it passed down through the genes?
Yeah, you can be genetically predisposed to celiac disease, which is the autoimmune disease that makes you react poorly to gluten. But numbers estimate that 1 in every 7 people in the U.S. has a gluten intolerance.
Oh, wow.
So, and there's not really a test for that unless you have an actual wheat allergy or a barley allergy or a rye allergy. An intolerance is really when your system doesn't do well with something.
And you just like don't feel well after
you don't
you've eaten
feel
something.
well. So I think if people are suffering from constant fatigue, or certainly GI issues, or you have another autoimmune situation going on, you can do a gluten-free challenge and go 4 weeks. You want to go at least 4 weeks, because 3 is when you start to feel good. And usually you're getting a little bit of gluten in one way or the other.
Because you're not used to eliminating it.
Because you're not used to it. So if you do 4 weeks, you really can see, like, is this making a significant change in how my body feels?
Well, we know gluten's it's a binder type agent, but talk about some of the hidden sources of gluten.
Well, that's the thing. It's a protein that's found in wheat, barley, and rye, and it's sticky. So and it's pretty cheap for companies to make and use. So it can be used in dressings to
Salad
be a
dressing.
salad dressing, chicken stock and broth, those types of things. It can be used to stabilize those, but it also is in lipstick.
Really?
It can be in lower end ice
What will be
creams.
on the box if it's lipstick? Is there I know on your website there's a list of things that gluten could be
There's
called.
a list of names for gluten, and that's the challenge, is you really kind of need to download that list from our website, or we have little cards we can send you, or look at, you know, National Celiac Foundation will give you a list, because there are a number of names for gluten. It's not just going to, it might say wheat gluten, but it probably says a number of other things. So you really need to have that list and learn to read labels. And it's in other things, you know, not just bread and pasta, but most commercial soy sauce in the U.S. is soy co-fermented with wheat. So anything that might contain soy sauce, it can be in your hair conditioner, it can be in hand soap. And I don't want to freak people out. There's a way to learn, you know, to go about doing this.
But reading labels is the key. You've just got to.
You absolutely have to, because it can be in things like bacon.
And this is one thing I know from reading on your website. The more processed a food is, the higher the chance it has gluten in it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now I always tell everybody, you get to eat the good sausages and the good hot dogs now. Congratulations, because you don't want to eat the ones with the fillers in them. But I always tell people, if you read the ingredient list of a product and a 3rd grader can't pronounce most of the words, there's a good chance it has gluten in it, and there's a pretty good chance you shouldn't be eating it anyway.
Okay. So in terms of baking and cooking, like you roasted this chicken, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What did you have to be aware of?
Well, some chicken, this is from a natural company, so some beef is, unless it's been marinated, beef is safe, fish is safe, pork is usually safe with the exception of sausages and bacon, anything that's had spices on it.
Or processed.
You want to check. But poultry can sometimes have what they call pump. And they'll add a saline solution or sometimes even spices that, that contain gluten. In fact, during Thanksgiving, I always end up with a much pricier turkey because some of the ones that they'll like give away for free at the grocery store contain pump that has gluten in it.
So is that indicated on the label
They
anywhere?
have to label that there's an additive. So I say when you're buying poultry, make sure you're looking for a product that says natural. And if they've added saline or salt or sodium, that's okay. They're doing that to retain moisture in the product. But if there's spices or anything else or a word you can't read, move to the next product.
Another one. Well, and on your website too, I know you even have a box club, which is especially helpful, I think, if people have just found out that they may be gluten intolerant, because it's like their whole world has changed in terms of eating.
It is. You know, I'll be honest, the first couple times I went to the grocery store, I was almost in tears. Because so many of, you know, everything from the enchilada sauce to the dressing I bought, I couldn't have anymore. It was making me sick. So we do brand guides. We give guidance of what people can buy that helps them. And then, the box club, I send 5 full-size products that we think are foodie quality. So we're G-free foodie. I only eat stuff that tastes great. And I think you should too.
That's right. Well, and that was the thing that I learned years ago, was that the gluten-free diet is one that everybody could be on. Because the food's good. And we're lucky now that there's so many resources available and so many products on the shelf that are labeled gluten-free that used to not be available.
There are, but there are things, like I say, like the poultry that might get you caught up, or the bacon. So this is a thick cut bacon. I just season this with salt and pepper. Individual spices are gluten-free. So fresh herbs like I used with this chicken, or individual spices, paprika by itself, cinnamon by itself, safe. Spice blends, lemon, herb, that kind of stuff. And often what they use on rotisserie chicken at the stores can contain gluten. And so I always say roast 2 chickens at a time. You'll have one for the next meal too, and it's even more flavorful.
Right. It's a slightly different way of preparing things, but certainly nothing that people can't handle, even if they've gotten the news.
It's like riding a bike.
It is.
And you might fall off like you do occasionally on a bike, but you just get back on and put your Band-Aid on and keep moving.
If you have been accidentally subjected to something, and maybe at someone else's house, how soon will you feel how soon will you get sick?
Well, for someone like me who has GI issues, it'll be within a couple of hours. So I'll eat something that's been cross-contaminated or had gluten in it, and within a couple of hours I will feel ill. And if I ingested, just a few bites of that item, I will be sick for 3 days.
Is that right? It's that long-lasting.
There are some people that are sick for a week. There are some people that don't get GI issues, but they'll get mouth sores or migraine headaches or astaxia, which is, I always say, it's like balloon head. It kind of feels like your brain and your mind is sort of floating away. It's not completely, and so you feel kind of a brain fog or hazy.
And I know on your website too, it's like a blog. There's a lot of people who share things, and like you say, it affects different people differently. And somebody may be reading that and find, oh, that's what I have. I've never known why I felt that way after eating certain things. So I really commend you on that. I think it's a really educational and helpful tool.
Thank you. We're trying to help people live deliciously gluten-free. So 25 writers on the site, thousands of recipes, restaurants all over the nation where you can eat gluten-free.
Doctors as well as nutritionists, other people.
Doctors, nutritionists, RNs, and a bunch of food bloggers, some people who are parenting gluten-free or gluten-free, dairy-free children. So all kinds of info.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and sharing all of this with us.
I was glad to do it. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. Next time on Creative Living, we'll learn all about California figs and demonstrate some home-style recipes that have been updated for today's homemakers. You can slice them or dice them. California figs provide the perfect sweet and savory balance to create lots of delicious treats. One of my next guests is with the California Fig Advisory Board, and she's going to discuss the historic significance of the fig, as well as talk about the fig industry and explain why fig consumption is on the rise. And we'll learn all about what my guest calls homestyle in a hurry. She explains that homestyle means cooking like your mother or grandmother used to do, but with new shortcuts, so it can be done much quicker and easier. Both of these topics will be featured on the next Creative Living show. If you ever have comments or suggestions or ideas for shows, you can email me at cheryl.borden@enmu.edu. I'd also like to ask you to become a fan of Creative Living on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com and in the search window, type in Creative Living with Sheryl Borden. Thanks so much, and I hope you'll plan to join me next time for Creative Living.
We're very pleased to offer a new booklet that accompanies this series of Creative Living. This booklet is titled the 6800 Series, and it features a wonderful collection of ideas and information. And it's available free of charge on our website. Posted as a PDF file, you can simply download the entire booklet or just the segments you're most interested in. For your copy of this new booklet, go to our website at KENW.org and then click on Creative Living. Scroll down to the booklet section and you can click on the booklet or on any of the other booklets we have available online. We'd also like to invite you to sign up for our free e-newsletter. Just go to KENW.org and click on the Sign Up Now button and input your email address. Thank you.